Mr. Christensen from Analysis Group, first of all, thanks for accepting this interview. And we will discuss about the impact of copyright scope changes on investment in the light of American, French and German case law. Did you notice a significant difference between US and European investments at this regard?
Yes, we analyzed the changes in venture capital investments following the decision in the United States in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, the Cartoon Network v. Cablevision case involving remote storage digital video recorders. Following that decision, we did notice a statistically significant change in investment that saw that the U.S. differentiate itself from the Europeans in terms of their ability to attract venture capital investment in cloud computing companies.
Did you also perceive the remarkable differences among the other European countries?
We did, as a further check of our analysis and our results for the United States compared to the EU. We also looked at two decisions within the EU. The first was in France with the Wizgo decision, and the second was in Germany with the Shift TV and Save TV cases. The French decision was a fairly definitive decision that came down saying that, in fact, the remote digital video recorders were not acceptable, or at least Wizgo's version of it was not acceptable. So when we compared venture capital investment in cloud computing for France against the rest of the EU, excluding Germany, where there was this other decision, we found that, in fact, France had a statistically significant adverse effect on their investment. So they ended up receiving less investment than did the rest of the EU, controlling for a number of other factors. We then found the same thing to be true in Germany, and this was true in spite of the fact that in Germany the decision was less definitive than it was in France. But ultimately, it sort of becomes a story very much along the lines of uncertainty, discouraging investment one way or the other. So in both cases, we have found that these decisions that really tended to define relatively broad copyright scopes have impaired investment in cloud computing.
I see. And according to you, how important is venture capital in cloud computing sector and in general on innovation?
So one can ask many questions about whether venture capital is sort of the best or certainly a dominant form of investment for innovation and growth. There are many different ways of trying to get the investment. It is certainly not the only mechanism for getting there. However, there have been a number of academic studies, both by my co-author Josh Lerner and by others, that have found that investment by venture capital companies has a much more positive effect on innovation by a factor of as much as 3 to 10 times the same dollars invested in traditional R&D and by traditional companies. It also, venture capital has had a very significant effect on employment. And so venture capital-backed companies have seen a very large growth in employment, especially in the United States. So I think that it does bring about quite a bit of innovation and innovation in ways that are very different than R&D in a traditional company setting. So that it's our belief that it is quite important, and the results that we find in our paper suggest while when we look at the United States versus the EU, it looks like there may have been as much as $1 billion in changed investment or an increase in investment in cloud computing. With the multiplier effect from it being a venture capital investment instead of traditional R&D, that could be as much as $2 to $5 billion of traditional R&D spending.
Okay, and finally, the most complicated question probably, and which strategies you'd suggest to European operators in order to attract investors from outside? I mean, mostly from the United States, but also from all the other third countries.
So in general, it's my view that investors really like certainty. And so what we have found with our study, one way to think of this, in the United States, there was a decision that came down on the side of relative certainty that digital video recorders, and therefore in part cloud technologies, are going to be okay. They're going to be allowable, and therefore it encourages investment. In France, there was a definitive decision saying that, in fact, it was not okay, and that discourages investment. And then in Germany, it is a more uncertain decision right now, and that has also had the effect of discouraging investment. And so to the extent that one wants to try and attract this sort of investment, the best way to go about doing so is to have a well-defined set of policies that are going to go ahead and get rid of this uncertainty as to whether or not the new technologies may be acceptable. If you either have decided that they will not be acceptable or you have left it ambiguous as to whether or not it may be acceptable, that is likely to discourage investment.
I see. So probably transparency and certain legal framework will be good suggestions also to the Italian government as well as to all the other European governors.
Very much so. And I think this is very much the type of discussion that has been had now for some time, especially to take an extreme example, when one considers investments in China. There's still quite a bit of uncertainty as to how exactly your investment may transpire, and that has caused quite a bit of hesitation among companies in terms of getting in there. The same thing applies, but on obviously a much different scale when we think about Italy, where to the extent that you can have a well-defined set of policies that can go ahead and make it clear that certain types of investment will be acceptable or certain technologies will be acceptable, that's going to have the effect of encouraging investment. Much in the same way, and even with standards, where one saw investments in cell phones take off much more in Italy and in Europe than in the United States, certainly in the first instance.